I've been weighing ashes for 12 years, and dead people don't get heavier. My name is Marcus Cheno, relation to the woman whose story I'm about to tell you, though the shared surname makes what happened feel even more unsettling. I work the evening shift at Eternal Rest Crematory in Sacramento, California. It's quiet work, methodical. Families trust us with their most precious burden, and I take that responsibility seriously. Every body that comes through our doors gets the same careful attention, the same dignified process, and every set of remains gets weighed to the exact tenth of a pound before going home with loved ones. The crematory sits on the edge of an industrial district, a low brick building surrounded by chain-link fence and mature oak trees. Inside, it's all white tile and stainless steel clean, clinical, respectful. The retort chambers hum quietly in the back room, maintaining their steady heat. During my shift, from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night, I might process anywhere from 2 to 6 bodies, depending on the day. It's methodical work that requires precision and patience. Families are counting on me to return their loved ones to them completely. Nothing lost, nothing forgotten. Mrs. Eleanor Chen arrived on a Tuesday in March of 2023, 84 years old, passed peacefully in her sleep according to the intake paperwork. Natural death, no complications. Her family had chosen a simple cremation with the ashes to be returned in a modest cherry wood urn they'd selected from our catalog. Standard process, nothing unusual. I remember her granddaughter's signature on the authorization. Forms need handwriting, the kind teachers used to insist on. The family seemed close-knit, respectful, grieving but not devastated. Mrs. Chen had lived a full life. I performed her cremation on Wednesday evening, my usual shift. The process takes approximately 3 hours at 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. I've done this hundreds of times. Load the body into the chamber, monitor the temperature, wait for the cycle to complete. Mrs. Chen's process went normally. No temperature fluctuations, no equipment issues. When the chamber finished its cycle, I removed the bone fragments and processed them through the cremulator, reducing everything to the fine, consistent ash that families expect. Standard procedure. But when I weighed her remains, something felt wrong. The scale read 6.2 pounds. I checked the calibration, weighed a test sample, verified the reading. 6.2 pounds exactly. According to industry standards, an adult cremation typically yields 4 to 8 pounds of ash, depending on bone density and body size. Mrs. Chen had been a small woman, maybe 5 feet tall and 90 pounds when she passed. 6.2 pounds fell within normal range, but something nagged at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I should double-check. I placed the urn back on the scale an hour later, just before my shift ended. 6.8 pounds. I stared at the digital display, certain I'd misread it the first time. But my logbook clearly showed 6.2 pounds in my own handwriting. I weighed the urn again immediately. 6.8 pounds. No question. I stayed late that night, rechecking everything. The scale calibrated perfectly with test weights. The urn showed no signs of additional material. I even called my supervisor, Janet, at home to ask if she'd ever encountered weight discrepancies in cremated remains. She assured me that scales sometimes drift, that I should recalibrate and document the final weight as 6.8 pounds. But I knew what I'd seen. The numbers in my logbook were clear. Thursday morning, I arrived early to check the urn again before Mrs. Chen's family came for pickup. 7.3 pounds. My hands shook as I wrote the number in my logbook. 3 separate weights, each one higher than the last. I called Janet again, told her I thought we had a serious problem. She drove in immediately, witnessed me weighing the urn herself. 7.3 pounds, confirmed. Marcus, I trust your work completely, she said, studying the logbook entries. But this doesn't make sense. Are you certain about these earlier measurements? I was certain. I showed her the security footage from our camera system, the one positioned above the scale area. The recordings clearly showed me placing the same urn on the scale at different times, recording weights in the logbook. But somehow, Mrs. Chen kept gaining weight. Janet suggested we transfer the ashes to a different urn. thinking perhaps moisture was somehow accumulating in the wood. We performed the transfer carefully, documenting everything. The new ceramic urn weighed exactly what it should, but the ashes themselves now registered 7.9 pounds, more than when we'd started. "We need to call the family," Janet said quietly. "Explain that there's been some kind of processing error. Offer them a full refund and our sincere apologies." But Mrs. Chen's granddaughter surprised us. When Janet explained the situation over the phone, the young woman went quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that still gives me chills. "My grandmother always said she'd never let anyone forget her, that she'd make sure every piece of herself stayed in this world." The family came that afternoon to collect the ashes. By then, the urn weighed 8.4 pounds. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter accepted the container without question, cradling it carefully against her chest. As they prepared to leave, she turned back to me. "She was a strong woman," she said simply. "She held on to everything that mattered to her. I guess she's still holding on." After they left, I checked our scale obsessively for weeks. Every other cremation processed normally, weights consistent and predictable. But I kept Mrs. Chen's measurements in my logbook, those impossible numbers climbing higher each time I checked. The security footage showed the same urn, the same careful placement on the scale, the same bewildered expression on my face as I read weights that shouldn't exist. I learned later that Mrs. Chen had been a refugee, arriving in America with nothing but the clothes she wore. She'd spent decades rebuilding her life, gathering family around her, accumulating the small, precious things that make a home. Her granddaughter told me she'd never thrown anything away, kept every letter, every photograph, every memento from 8 decades of determined living. I still work the evening shift at Eternal Rest. Still weigh remains with the same careful precision. But sometimes, late at night, when the crematory is quiet and the oak trees rustle outside, I think about Mrs. Chen and wonder if some people simply carry more weight than their bodies can hold. If the things we refuse to let go of somehow follow us even into fire, adding substance to what should be only ash and memory. The scale works perfectly. It always has. But I've learned that some measurements can't be explained by calibration or procedure or the predictable science of reduction. Some weights, it seems, only grow heavier with time. Some reflections show more than they should. I'm Elena Rodriguez, and I've been a funeral director at Peaceful Valley Memorial Chapel for 8 years. In this business, you learn to read grief like a language, the way shoulders curve with loss, how voices break on certain words, the particular silence that follows a final goodbye. But mirrors, I've learned, sometimes reflect things that aren't meant to be seen. Our funeral home sits in a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The building dates back to 1897, all dark wood and stained glass, with the kind of architectural details that make families feel their loved ones are resting somewhere dignified. We have 4 viewing rooms, each named for a different letter A through DO. We rarely use room C anymore, not since I started noticing things in the mirror. The mirror itself is beautiful, an ornate piece from the home's original era. Heavy silver frame with intricate scrollwork, about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, positioned on the east wall of viewing room C so families can see themselves as they approach the casket. The previous owner, Mrs. Hartford, had insisted it stay when she sold the property to our funeral home. She said it had been in her family for generations, that it belonged with the house. We kept it partly for the aesthetics it matched the room's Victorian character and partly because removing something that large would have left an obvious mark on the wallpaper. For the first few years, I never paid the mirror much attention. It was just part of the room's furniture, reflecting the soft lighting and flower arrangements the way mirrors do. But sometime in the winter of 2022, I began to notice that families lingered strangely in room C. Not the normal lingering of grief, but something else. They would be speaking quietly to each other, sharing memories, and then suddenly fall silent. Their eyes would fix on something behind me, and when I turned to look, there would be nothing there except the mirror reflecting the casket and flowers. The first time I really paid attention was during Mr. Peterson's service. His daughter Sarah had been delivering a beautiful eulogy about her father's love of gardening when she stopped mid-sentence. Her face went pale, and she stared directly at the mirror behind me. Other family members followed her gaze, and for a moment, the entire room held its breath. When I turned to see what had captured their attention, I saw only the normal reflection, the casket, the flowers, the gathered mourners. But Sarah's hands were shaking when she resumed speaking, and she couldn't seem to look away from the mirror for the rest of the service. After the family left, I stood alone in room C, studying the mirror carefully. The reflection showed exactly what it should. The empty casket, the wilting flowers, the chairs arranged in neat rows. But there was something about the quality of the reflection, a depth that seemed to extend beyond the glass itself. I moved closer, examining the silver frame for any warping or distortion that might explain what the families were seeing. The mirror appeared perfectly normal, its surface clean and undamaged. I decided to test it systematically. During the next service in room C, Mrs. Rodriguez's funeral, no relation, despite the shared name, I positioned myself where I could watch both the mirror and the family simultaneously. The service proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Her son was reading from Psalms when I saw it. In the mirror, Mrs. Rodriguez was sitting up in her casket. Not dramatically, not like something from a movie. She was simply upright, hands folded in her lap, watching her son read. Her expression was peaceful, attentive, the way someone might look while listening to a favorite song. But in the actual casket, she lay exactly as I'd positioned her that morning, still, composed, eyes closed. I blinked hard, certain I'd imagined it, but the reflection persisted. Mrs. Rodriguez continued to sit upright in the mirror, occasionally turning her head slightly as different family members spoke. Meanwhile, her physical body remained motionless in the casket. I watched her son's face as he read, saw the moment his eyes caught the mirror's reflection. He stumbled over the words, his voice catching, but he continued reading. The entire family seemed to sense something without being able to articulate what. After that service, I stopped scheduling viewings in room C. I told my staff it needed maintenance, that the lighting fixtures required rewiring, but the mirror wouldn't stay put. I'd arrive in the morning to find it had moved to room A or B, always positioned where families would see it during services. When I moved it back to room C, it would reappear somewhere else within days. I brought this to my supervisor, Mr. Walsh, who'd been in the funeral business for 30 years. He listened politely, then suggested I might be experiencing stress-related hallucinations. The funeral industry can be emotionally demanding, he said. Perhaps I should consider taking some time off. But I knew what I'd seen. The mirror was showing something that shouldn't be there. The situation escalated during the Henderson service in mid-March. Mrs. Henderson had requested an open casket for her husband's viewing, despite the fact that he'd been in hospice care for months and looked quite frail. I'd done my best with cosmetics and positioning, but he remained obviously diminished by his long illness. The family gathered in room A, where I'd moved the mirror that morning, hoping to avoid any disturbances. But as Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter began speaking about her grandfather's strength and vitality, everyone's attention gradually shifted to the mirror. I followed their gaze and saw Mr. Henderson not only sitting up in his casket but looking robust and healthy, the way he must have appeared decades earlier. His color was good, his posture straight, his eyes bright with interest as he listened to his granddaughter's words. In the actual casket, his body remained exactly as I'd positioned it, but the mirror showed a version of him that seemed fully present and engaged. The granddaughter's voice grew stronger as she continued speaking, as if she were drawing energy from what she saw in the reflection. Other family members began sharing stories, all of them occasionally glancing at the mirror, their grief seeming to lighten slightly. It was as if the mirror was giving them permission to remember him as he'd been rather than as he'd become. That night, I stayed late to observe the mirror when no one else was around. I sat in the dark viewing room, watching the reflection of the empty casket in the dim emergency lighting. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 3 in the morning, I saw movement in the glass. Not dramatic or frightening, just a subtle shift, as if someone had adjusted their position slightly. The casket in the mirror was no longer empty. A figure sat quietly inside it, patient and still, as if waiting for morning and the return of the mourners. I approached the mirror slowly, studying the reflection. The figure was indistinct, neither clearly male nor female, young nor old. But there was something familiar about the posture, the way the head tilted slightly toward the sound of my footsteps. As I drew closer, the figure seemed to acknowledge my presence with a subtle nod, then returned to its quiet vigil. I don't schedule services in viewing rooms with mirrors anymore. We've rearranged all the furniture, repositioned the caskets, changed the lighting. But the mirror continues to move through the building, appearing wherever families gather to say goodbye. Staff members have learned not to mention it, and families seem to accept its presence as part of the natural order of grief. Sometimes I wonder if the mirror is showing us something that was always there, the part of people that doesn't diminish with illness or death. The version of ourselves that remains engaged and present even when the body can no longer participate. But I've stopped trying to understand it completely. In this business, you learn that some mysteries are meant to comfort rather than be solved, and some reflections show us exactly what we need to see. Fire has never failed me before. I'm Dennis Kowalski, and I've operated crematory equipment for 15 years at Mountain View Memorial in Denver, Colorado. In all that time, through hundreds of cremations, I've learned to trust the absolute reliability of heat. Gas burns, chambers reach temperature, organic matter reduces to ash. It's chemistry, physics, the fundamental transformation that's been helping humans say goodbye to their dead for thousands of years. But Eduardo Valdez taught me that some cold runs deeper than fire can reach. The crematory operates like a small, factor-efficient, precise, respectful. My shift runs from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. I maintain 3 retort chambers, each one a steel-lined furnace capable of reaching 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The process is straightforward. Preheat the chamber to 1,800 degrees. Load the body. Monitor the temperature for 3 to 4 hours while combustion completes. Then process the remaining bone fragments. Every cremation follows identical parameters. Temperature, timing, and procedure never vary. Our facility sits behind Mountain View's main funeral home, a separate building designed for function rather than aesthetics. Concrete floors, ventilation systems, digital monitoring equipment that tracks every aspect of the cremation process. The retort chambers dominate the main room, large, industrial machines that hum quietly when operating at temperature. I take pride in maintaining them perfectly. Families trust us with their most precious cargo, and mechanical failure is never acceptable. Eduardo Valdez arrived on a Monday morning in October of 2024. 79 years old, retired construction worker, passed from heart failure according to the intake documents. His wife Carmen had chosen cremation with the ashes to be returned in a simple bronze urn. Standard process, no complications noted. Mr. Valdez had been a large man, broad-shouldered even in death, with calloused hands that spoke of decades working outdoors. Nothing unusual about the preparation or paperwork. I loaded him into Chamber 2 at 9:15 that morning, after confirming the temperature had stabilized at 1,800 degrees. The digital display showed perfect operating parameters: gas flow, optimal exhaust systems functioning, internal sensors reading exactly where they should. I've performed this routine so many times I could do it blindfolded. Close the chamber door, initiate the cycle, monitor the readouts. Mr. Valdez's cremation should have been completed by 1 o'clock that afternoon, but 30 minutes after loading, something went wrong. The temperature display began dropping, not gradually, the way it might if there were a gas supply issue, but precipitously. 1,800 degrees became 1,600, then 1,400, then 800. Within an hour, the chamber temperature had fallen to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, barely hot enough to warm food, let alone complete a cremation. I'd never seen anything like it. I shut down the cycle immediately and called our equipment maintenance company. The technician, Robert, arrived within 2 hours and performed a complete diagnostic. Gas lines, perfect pressure. Ignition systems, functioning normally. Temperature sensors, accurately calibrated. Ventilation, proper airflow. Every component tested within specifications. Robert fired up the chamber without any remains inside and watched it climb to 1800 degrees within 20 minutes. "Equipment's fine," he told me, consulting his diagnostic tablet. "Maybe you had a gas pressure fluctuation from the utility company. Try the cremation again tomorrow." Tuesday morning, I preheated chamber 2 to 1800 degrees and loaded Mr. Valdez again. The same thing happened. Temperature began dropping within minutes of closing the chamber door. This time, I documented everything carefully: gas, pressure readings, exhaust flow rates, ambient temperature, even the humidity level in the building. All normal. But Mr. Valdez's body seemed to absorb heat faster than the burners could produce it. I tried chamber 1 on Wednesday. Same result. Chamber 3 on Thursday. The temperature drop was consistent every time: 1800 degrees to 400 within the first hour, regardless of which chamber I used. By Friday, I'd attempted Mr. Valdez's cremation 6 times across 3 different machines. My logbook documented each failure with precise measurements and timestamps. The equipment worked perfectly for other cremations, but something about Mr. Valdez defied combustion. Carmen Valdez called that Friday afternoon while I was reviewing the temperature logs, trying to find some pattern I'd missed. Her voice was gentle but concerned. "Dennis, this is Carmen Valdez. I was wondering about Eduardo's cremation. The funeral director said there might be some delays." I explained the equipment issues as delicately as I could, avoiding technical details that might sound alarming. "Mechanical problems," I told her. "We were bringing in additional technicians." Her husband would receive the same careful attention as every other family we served. "He was always cold," she said quietly. "Even in summer, even after working in the sun all day. I used to joke that he'd stolen all the warmth out of our house and hidden it somewhere. Had to sleep with extra blankets year-round just to stay comfortable next to him." Something about her words made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate why. After she hung up, I stood in the crematory looking at the 3 retort chambers, all of them functioning perfectly for every cremation except Eduardo Valdez. The temperature logs showed undeniable evidence of what I'd experienced, but no explanation for why it was happening. On Monday, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of preheating the chamber, I loaded Mr. Valdez first, and then gradually brought the temperature up, monitoring every degree of increase. The chamber climbed normally until it reached about 600 degrees. Then something changed. The digital readout began fluctuating wildly: 700, 500, 800, 400, as if the chamber couldn't decide what temperature it wanted to maintain. But the strangest part was the chamber door itself. Despite the internal temperature chaos, the exterior surface felt ice cold to the touch. Not warm, not hot, but actually cold, as if something inside was drawing heat out through the steel walls. I pressed my palm against the door and felt a chill that seemed to penetrate my skin. Robert returned that afternoon with additional diagnostic equipment and a puzzled expression. He'd never encountered a situation where functioning equipment produced such inconsistent results. We ran every possible test gas chromatography on the fuel supply, thermal imaging of the chamber walls, even electromagnetic field measurements in case there was some kind of interference. Everything came back normal. "Dennis, I've been maintaining crematory equipment for 23 years, he said, packing up his tools. "I've seen mechanical failures, gas leaks, electrical problems, temperature sensor malfunctions, but I've never seen equipment that works perfectly except for one specific case. It doesn't make sense." That evening, I called my supervisor and recommended we transfer Mr. Valdez to another crematory. Our equipment clearly couldn't handle his cremation for reasons we couldn't identify. Better to send him somewhere else than continue failing his family. The transfer happened the next morning. 3 weeks later, Carmen Valdez called again. This time her voice carried a different quality: not concern, but bewilderment. "Dennis, I received Eduardo's ashes yesterday from the other crematory. But there's something strange. The urn feels ice cold, even though it's been sitting in my warm house for over a day. I put it in direct sunlight this morning, and it's still cold to the touch. Is that normal? I told her I'd never heard of anything like that, which was true. Cremated remains should be temperature neutral, no different from any other inorganic material. I suggested she contact the crematory that had completed the process. But privately, I wasn't surprised. Something about Eduardo Valdez had been drawing heat away from the retort chambers, creating cold where there should have been fire. If that quality had somehow transferred to his ashes, then Carmen would be living with a coldness that couldn't be warmed. I still operate the same 3 retort chambers, and they still function perfectly. Temperature logs show consistent 1800-degree cycles for every cremation. But I keep Eduardo Valdez's documentation in my desk. Drawer 6 failed attempts with temperature readings that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I think about Carmen, living with an urn that stays perpetually cold, and wonder if some people carry winter inside them so deep that even fire can't reach it. The equipment never lies, but sometimes the truth it tells is harder to accept than mechanical failure would be. Some roads choose their own travelers. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I've been driving for Eternal Rest Transport Services for 6 years, moving remains between funeral homes, crematoriums, and cemeteries across northern Michigan. It's solitary work that requires reliability and respect families, trust me, to deliver their loved ones safely to their final destinations. But the route to Greenlawn Cemetery taught me that some journeys have their own agenda, regardless of what the driver intends. My work involves transporting bodies in a specially equipped van between facilities throughout the Tri-County area. Most days, I'll make 3 or 4 runs picking up from hospitals, delivering to funeral homes, or taking cremated remains to cemeteries for burial or scattering services. The routes are straightforward, mapped out by GPS, and optimized for efficiency. I know every major road, every shortcut, every traffic pattern between Traverse City and the surrounding townships. After 6 years, I could navigate most routes without looking at directions. Greenlawn Cemetery sits 15 miles east of town, a peaceful rural cemetery established in the 1800s. The drive normally takes 25 minutes on Highway 12, straight through farmland and patches of state forest. It's one of my regular destinations. Greenlawn handles burials for 3 different funeral homes, so I make the trip at least twice a week. The cemetery sits on a hill overlooking the Boardman River Valley, with old-growth oaks shading the older sections and newer plots extending toward the back fence line. The GPS detour started in late September of 2024. I was transporting Mrs. Henderson's remains for a morning burial when my navigation system suddenly announced a route change. Instead of continuing straight on Highway 12, it directed me to turn left onto County Road 18, then right onto an unmarked gravel road I'd never noticed before. The detour added 20 minutes to the journey, winding through dense woods and past an abandoned farmhouse before eventually reconnecting with the main highway about a mile from the cemetery. I assumed it was a traffic issue, maybe construction or an accident ahead. The GPS often reroutes around delays, and rural roads can be unpredictable. The farmhouse caught my attention as I passed. 2-story white clapboard, probably built in the 1920s, with a sagging front porch and boarded windows. Not unusual for the area. Michigan farm country is dotted with abandoned homesteads where families moved away or farms failed. But something about the building felt purposeful, as if it were waiting for something rather than simply decaying. When I reached Greenlawn Cemetery, the groundskeeper mentioned that Highway 12 had been clear all morning. No construction, no accidents, no reason for a detour. I checked my GPS for traffic updates and found no reported delays. Strange, but not alarming. Technology glitches happen, especially in rural areas with spotty cell coverage. But the detour happened again the following week. This time I was transporting Mr. Rodriguez's ashes for a family scattering ceremony. Same route change, same gravel road, same abandoned farmhouse. I tried to override the GPS and continue straight on Highway 12, but found myself unconsciously following the turn signals anyway. Not dramatically, I wasn't fighting the steering wheel or anything theatrical. I simply took the turns the GPS suggested, as if my hands were following directions I didn't remember receiving. The farmhouse looked exactly the same: weathered white siding, broken shutters, weeds growing tall around the foundation. But I noticed details I'd missed before. The front door stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond the threshold. A rusty mailbox leaned at an angle beside the driveway, with the name Mitchell painted in fading black letters. Not an uncommon surname in Michigan, but seeing it there made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate. By November, the detour had become routine. Every trip to Greenlawn Cemetery resulted in the same 20-minute deviation through the woods, past the Mitchell farmhouse, regardless of traffic conditions or GPS updates. I started leaving earlier to account for the extra time, telling myself it was just a quirk of the navigation system. But privately, I began to look forward to seeing the house, as if it were a landmark that confirmed I was on the right path. During a delivery in mid-November, I decided to investigate. I was transporting cremated remains for an afternoon burial, with plenty of time built into the schedule. When I reached the farmhouse, I pulled into the overgrown driveway and turned off the engine. The silence was complete: no traffic sounds, no bird calls, just the faint whisper of wind through bare branches. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the farmhouse was surprisingly well preserved. Dust-covered furniture arranged as if the family had stepped out temporarily rather than abandoned the property. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, with family photographs still displayed on the mantel. The kitchen contained dishes in the sink, as if someone had been interrupted during meal preparation decades earlier. On a small table by the front window, I found a guest book, the kind used at funeral homes or memorial services, bound in black leather with lined pages for visitors to sign. Most entries dated back to the 1950s and 60s, neighbors and friends offering condolences to the Mitchell family. But as I flipped through the pages, I found more recent entries, much more recent. My own signature appeared 17 times, dated over the past 2 months. The handwriting was unmistakably mine: same loops, same pressure, same abbreviated S. Mitchell I'd used professionally for years. But the dates corresponded to days I'd never visited the farmhouse, times when I'd driven straight past without stopping. According to the guest book, I'd been coming here regularly since my first GPS detour, signing in after each visit. I flipped to the most recent entry, dated that morning. My signature was there, in ink that looked fresh, as if I'd signed it moments before discovering the book. But I had no memory of entering the farmhouse previously, let alone signing a guest book. The implications made my hands shake as I studied the familiar handwriting. In the back of the book, I found older entries with the same surname, various Mitchells signing in over the decades: Robert Mitchell, Elizabeth Mitchell, David Mitchell. A family history documented in condolence signatures, suggesting the farmhouse had served as some kind of memorial gathering place for generations. The most recent entry before my own signatures belonged to Margaret Mitchell, dated October of 1978. As I studied the guest book, I noticed something else disturbing. My 17 signatures weren't random. They corresponded exactly to my 17 trips to Greenlawn Cemetery over the past 2 months. Every time I'd been detoured past the farmhouse, I'd apparently stopped and signed the book, even though I had no conscious memory of doing so. The dates and times matched my delivery records perfectly. I left the farmhouse quickly, driving straight to Greenlawn Cemetery without consulting the GPS. The burial service proceeded normally, but I couldn't shake the image of my own handwriting in that guest book, documenting visits I didn't remember making. That evening, I researched the property records and discovered that the Mitchell farmhouse had been abandoned since 1978, when the last family member, Margaret Mitchell, passed away without heirs. The GPS still detours me past the farmhouse on every trip to Greenlawn Cemetery. I've tried different routes, updated the software, even bought a new navigation system. But I always end up on that gravel road, passing the white clapboard house with its leaning mailbox and slightly open door. Sometimes I park and go inside, though I never remember deciding to stop. The guest book continues to document my visits, my signature appearing after each detour in handwriting that grows more familiar each time I see it. I've learned not to question the route. Some roads, it seems, remember their travelers better than the travelers remember the roads. And some families, even abandoned ones, continue to keep track of who comes to pay their respects. Chemistry doesn't lie, but sometimes it tells truths we'd rather not hear. I'm Vincent Reyes, and I've been embalming bodies for 18 years at Cornerstone Funeral Home in Bakersfield, California. In this profession, you learn to trust the science: formaldehyde concentration, arterial pressure, drainage flow rates. The chemicals do exactly what they're designed to do: preserve tissue, slow decomposition, restore a peaceful appearance for families to say goodbye. But the bodies from Riverside Nursing Home taught me that some preservation goes deeper than science can explain. My workroom occupies the basement level of Cornerstone, a climate-controlled space with stainless steel tables, overhead surgical lighting, and industrial ventilation systems. Everything is designed for precision and hygiene. I maintain a strict protocol for every embalming arterial injection of formaldehyde-based fluid, cavity treatment, cosmetic restoration. The process typically takes 2 to 3 hours, depending on the condition of the deceased and the family's viewing preferences. After nearly 2 decades, I can perform the procedure with my eyes closed. Formaldehyde arrives in 50-gallon drums from Westfield Chemical Supply, a company I've worked with for over a decade. The fluid is always the same pale amber color, with the sharp medicinal smell that defines funeral homes. Concentration levels remain consistent batch to batch: 25% formaldehyde, 70% water, 5% additional preservatives and dyes. The chemistry never varies. Bodies respond predictably to the embalming process, achieving the peaceful, dignified appearance families expect. Riverside Nursing Home sits on the east side of town, a 100-bed facility that's been serving elderly residents for 40 years. We handle most of their funeral arrangements, natural deaths, expected passings, families who've had time to prepare for loss. The residents typically arrive in good condition for embalming, having received quality medical care right up until the end. Nothing unusual about the facility or their deceased residents. At least, nothing I noticed until the formaldehyde started changing color. The first time it happened was with Mrs. Patterson in November of 2023, 86 years old, passed peacefully from heart failure at Riverside. Standard embalming case, no complications anticipated. But when I began the arterial injection, the formaldehyde in my lines turned pink. Not gradually, not subtly within minutes of starting the process. The clear, amber fluid became a soft rose color, like diluted strawberry milk. I stopped the procedure immediately, assuming contamination in my equipment, flushed the lines, replaced the tubing, tested the fluid directly from the drum. Everything appeared normal, clear, amber formaldehyde with the proper chemical smell. But the moment I resumed Mrs. Patterson's embalming, the fluid turned pink again. By the time I completed the process, every line in my system carried rose-colored preservation fluid. I called Westfield Chemical that afternoon, describing the color change to their technical support department. The chemist I spoke with insisted that formaldehyde doesn't change color during normal embalming procedures. He suggested contamination in my mixing tanks or a reaction with medication in the deceased's system. But when I tested the same batch of fluid on Mr. Henderson the next day, a body from a different nursing home, everything remained normal amber. Mrs. Patterson looked beautiful for her viewing. Better than beautiful, actually. Her skin retained a warm, healthy flush that made her appear to be sleeping rather than deceased. Family members commented on how peaceful she looked, how much the embalming had helped with their grief. But something about her appearance troubled me. The pink-tinted preservation had given her complexion an almost living quality that seemed inappropriate for a funeral setting. Over the following months, every body from Riverside Nursing Home produced the same result: pink formaldehyde, regardless of the deceased's age, gender, or cause of death. I started documenting each case carefully: fluid color changes, completion times, final appearance. The pattern was consistent. Bodies from other facilities embalmed normally, But Riverside residents caused my chemicals to transform into something I'd never encountered. I switched suppliers in February of 2024, ordering formaldehyde from Premier Preservation Products. Same result. The fluid turned pink within minutes of starting arterial injection on Riverside bodies. I tried a third supplier, then a fourth. Every company insisted their formaldehyde was chemically pure, properly mixed, within all standard specifications. But something about the Riverside residents was changing my preservation fluid in ways that defied explanation. The worst part wasn't the color change, it was how the bodies looked afterward. The pink formaldehyde created an unnaturally lifelike appearance that made families linger longer at viewings, speaking to their deceased loved ones as if expecting responses. Skin that felt warm to the touch despite being chemically preserved. Facial expressions that seemed to shift slightly between visits to the preparation room. And the eyes, always the eyes that appeared to track movement when I wasn't looking directly at them. I started requesting different preservation protocols for Riverside cases, explaining to families that some bodies required specialized treatment. Higher concentrations of standard formaldehyde, extended processing times, anything to avoid using the pink fluid that seemed to preserve too much life rather than too little. But the families preferred the results they'd seen with other Riverside viewings. They wanted their loved ones to have that same healthy, peaceful appearance. Dr. Martinez from Riverside called me in April, asking about the embalming procedures I used for their residents. Families had been commenting on how lifelike their deceased relatives appeared, how the funeral home seemed to work miracles with cosmetic restoration. He wondered if we offered the same enhanced preservation for other facilities. It's not enhanced preservation, I told him. It's something else entirely, something I can't control or replicate. What do you mean? He asked. I couldn't explain about the pink formaldehyde without sounding unprofessional, so I deflected. Some bodies respond differently to embalming. Your residents seem to preserve particularly well. But privately, I'd begun to suspect that whatever was happening at Riverside, whether in their water supply, their medication protocols, or something else entirely, was changing the body chemistry of their residents in ways that affected preservation. The pink formaldehyde wasn't a contamination issue. It was a reaction to something these people carried in their tissue, something that transformed standard preservation fluid into a compound I'd never seen before. The situation escalated during Mr. Thompson's viewing in late April. His family had gathered for what should have been a quiet memorial service, but they couldn't stop staring at how alive he looked. His daughter kept reaching toward his face, as if to check for breathing. His son mentioned how Mr. Thompson's eyes seemed to follow him around the room. By the end of the viewing, I had to ask the family to conclude their visit because their behavior was making other families uncomfortable. That night, I returned to check on Mr. Thompson before his burial the next morning. The preparation room was dark, lit only by emergency lighting, but I could see his form on the table. As I approached to adjust his position for transport, his eyes opened, not the mechanical opening that sometimes occurs when facial muscles relax, but a deliberate, conscious movement. He looked at me directly, and for a moment I saw recognition in his expression. I left the room immediately and didn't return until morning, when his eyes were closed again and his face had resumed the peaceful expression I'd created, but I knew what I'd seen. The pink formaldehyde hadn't just preserved Mr. Thompson's tissue, it had preserved something else, something that should have departed when his heart stopped beating. I still embalm bodies from Riverside Nursing Home, but I've learned to work quickly and avoid eye contact during the process. The formaldehyde still turns pink, the bodies still look unnaturally alive, and families still marvel at the lifelike appearance of their deceased relatives. I've stopped trying to explain the chemistry to suppliers or requesting different preservation methods. Some reactions, I've learned, occur at levels deeper than molecular structure, and some preservation keeps more than just tissue intact, maintaining qualities that burial is meant to help families release. The pink formaldehyde does exactly what it's supposed to do, just preserves more life than death typically allows. Flowers know secrets that gardeners never planted. I'm Rachel Torres, and I've worked night security at Serenity Gardens Funeral Home for 4 years. The job requires walking the building every 2 hours, checking locks, monitoring alarm systems, ensuring the dignity of the deceased is maintained even in darkness. It's quiet work, respectful work, with long stretches of solitude broken only by the settling sounds old buildings make. But the chapel flowers taught me that some arrangements carry messages that bloom in ways no florist ever intended. Serenity Gardens sits on 5 acres in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, a sprawling complex that includes the main funeral home, a crematory, and 3 separate chapels for services. The building dates to the 1970s, all earth tones and natural wood, designed to provide comfort during grief. My shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, Sunday through Thursday. During those 8 hours, I'm the only living person in a building that houses an average of 6 to 8 deceased at any given time. The security routine is methodical and unchanging. Every 2 hours, I walk a predetermined route through the building main entrance, administrative offices, preparation rooms, viewing areas, and the 3 chapels. Each chapel contains a different arrangement of flowers, usually delivered that afternoon for the next day's services. The arrangements follow standard funeral patterns: standing sprays near the casket, wreaths on easels, smaller arrangements on side tables. Lilies, roses, carnations, chrysanthemums flowers, chosen for their symbolic meaning and ability to maintain dignity throughout long viewing periods. Chapel A handles our largest services, with capacity for 200 mourners. Chapel B accommodates medium-sized gatherings, while Chapel C provides intimacy for small family services. Each space maintains its own character through lighting, furniture arrangement, and floral displays. The flowers arrive fresh each morning and are positioned according to the family's preferences and our staff's experience with proper funeral aesthetics. During my first 3 years, the flower arrangements remained exactly as positioned until morning staff arrived to prepare for services. Florists know their business. They create displays that maintain their shape and beauty throughout the night. Funeral flowers are selected specifically for their stability and longevity. They don't wilt quickly, don't shed petals easily, and don't require repositioning once properly arranged. But in February of 2024, I began noticing changes during my rounds. Small changes initially: a rose turned at a different angle, a lily stem shifted slightly to the left, a carnation that seemed to have rotated 90 degrees since my previous check. Nothing dramatic, nothing that couldn't be explained by natural settling or minor vibrations from the building's heating system. But the changes occurred consistently, only in the chapels and only with flowers arranged for the next day's services. By March, the movements had become more purposeful. Entire sections of arrangements would relocate themselves between my 10 o'clock and midnight rounds. Roses that had been positioned on the left side of a spray would appear on the right. Wreaths would rotate to face different directions. Small arrangements would move from side tables to positions near the casket. The changes defied explanation, but they also defied the natural behavior of cut flowers. I started documenting the changes with my phone camera, taking pictures during each round to track the movements. The images confirmed what I was seeing: flowers rearranging themselves into patterns that hadn't existed when I'd checked 2 hours earlier. But the patterns seemed random at first, lacking any obvious meaning or message. Then I learned to read what they were spelling. The revelation came during a Wednesday night shift in late March. Chapel B was prepared for Thursday service for Mrs. Anderson, an elderly woman who'd passed from natural causes. The floral arrangements included the usual funeral display: standing sprays, wreaths, small table arrangements in soft pastels and whites. But during my midnight round, I noticed the flowers had repositioned themselves into what looked almost like letters. I studied the arrangement carefully, trying to determine if I was seeing patterns that didn't actually exist. But the roses, lilies, and carnations had definitely moved into formations that resembled alphabetic characters. Not perfect letters, but clear enough to suggest intentional spelling. I took photographs and continued my rounds, returning at 2 a.m. to find the arrangement had shifted again, the floral letters becoming more distinct. By 4 a.m., the message was unmistakable. The flowers had arranged themselves to spell Patricia Wong in white roses and baby's breath, stretched across the front of the chapel in elegant cursive lettering. I'd never heard the name before, but the floral script was beautiful and precise, as if an expert calligrapher had used flowers instead of ink. I researched Patricia Wong online during my break and found no recent obituaries or death notices. She appeared to be a real persona, 68-year-old retired teacher living in Scottsdale, but according to social media and news sources, she was alive and well. The flowers were spelling the name of someone who hadn't died. Thursday morning, I mentioned the floral rearrangements to my supervisor, Jim, describing them as possible vandalism or security concerns. He checked the chapel before Miss Anderson's service and found everything positioned normally. The flowers had returned to their original funeral arrangement, showing no evidence of the nighttime spelling I'd documented. 1 week later, Patricia Wong's obituary appeared in the Arizona Republic. She'd passed suddenly from a heart attack on Wednesday evening, exactly 7 days after the flowers had spelled her name. The pattern continued through April and May. Every few weeks, chapel flowers would rearrange themselves overnight to spell names in cursive script. Always names of real people. Always people who were alive when the flowers spelled their names. Always people who would die exactly 1 week later. I started keeping a notebook, documenting each name and confirming the subsequent deaths through obituary searches. Margaret Stevens died 7 days after the flowers spelled her name in yellow chrysanthemums. Robert Martinez passed exactly 1 week after white roses arranged themselves into his full name. Jennifer Park suffered a fatal accident 7 days after the chapel flowers spelled Jennifer Park in pink carnations and baby's breath. I stopped trying to explain the phenomenon to my supervisor or coworkers. How do you tell someone that funeral flowers are predicting deaths with perfect accuracy? Instead, I began treating the overnight spelling as a regular part of my security routine. When flowers arranged themselves into names, I documented the message and waited for the inevitable obituary to appear 1 week later. The system worked until I recognized a name. During my rounds on a Tuesday night in early June, Chapel C's flowers had repositioned themselves into a message that made my blood run cold. In white roses and eucalyptus, spelled in the same elegant script I'd grown familiar with, David Torres. David Torres was my next-door neighbor, a 42-year-old contractor who coached Little League baseball and helped elderly neighbors with yard work. I'd known him for 3 years, watched him raise his 2 daughters as a single father, shared tools and conversation over our backyard fence. He was healthy, active, showed no signs of illness or depression. According to the pattern I'd documented, David Torres would die within 1 week. I couldn't concentrate on the rest of my rounds that night. The floral message remained in Chapel C until morning, when the flowers returned to their normal arrangement for that day's service. But I'd photographed the name, documented the time, added David Torres to my notebook with the date his death should occur. That week, I found reasons to check on David more frequently, borrowed a ladder I didn't need, asked about his work schedule, even suggested he visit his doctor for a routine checkup. He seemed fine tired from work, busy with his daughter's activities, but healthy and looking forward to summer vacation. Nothing in his demeanor suggested approaching death. On the 7th day, Tuesday evening, I heard sirens in my neighborhood while getting ready for my shift. David Torres had suffered a massive heart attack while coaching baseball practice. The paramedics couldn't revive him. He died at the hospital at 8:47 p.m., exactly 1 week after the chapel flowers had spelled his name. I attended David's funeral at Serenity Gardens the following Thursday. His daughters spoke about their father's kindness, his dedication to community, his love of baseball and family. The chapel was filled with flowers, roses, lilies, carnations arranged in traditional funeral displays. I watched them carefully throughout the service, wondering if they carried other messages I hadn't learned to read yet. I still work the overnight shift at Serenity Gardens, still walk my rounds every 2 hours, still document the movements of chapel flowers when they arrange themselves into names. But I've stopped researching the people whose names appear in petals and stems. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry, and some messages arrive too early to change anything. The flowers continue spelling names of people who haven't died yet, and those people continue dying exactly 1 week later. I've learned that destiny sometimes announces itself through the most beautiful means possible, and that even death can be gentle when it takes time to spell itself out in roses. Dead people don't fill out paperwork, but sometimes they have things left to say. I'm Thomas Chen, and I've been a funeral director at Heritage Memorial Services in Portland, Oregon, for 11 years. The paperwork in this business is extensive intake forms, burial permits, insurance documentation, family authorization signatures. Every detail must be precise, because families depend on us to honor their loved ones, exactly as requested. But some forms started completing themselves, written in handwriting I recognized from signatures on wills and birthday cards, penned by people who could no longer hold a pen. Heritage Memorial occupies a converted Victorian mansion in southeast Portland, complete with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and the kind of architectural details that help families feel their grief is being treated with appropriate dignity. My office sits on the second floor, overlooking the garden where families often gather after services. The room contains a mahogany desk, filing cabinets for active cases, and the computer system where I process the endless documentation that accompanies death in modern America. Intake forms represent the beginning of every funeral arrangement. These documents capture essential information: full legal name, date and place of birth, social security number, military service records, surviving family members, preferred burial or cremation options. Families typically complete these forms during our initial consultation, often while still processing their loss. The handwriting is usually shaky, emotional, sometimes requiring clarification or correction as grief affects concentration and memory. The forms themselves are straightforward 2 pages of fields covering personal information, family details, and service preferences. Nothing complicated, but absolutely crucial for legal and practical reasons. Cemetery plots must be purchased under the correct name. Insurance benefits require exact documentation. Military honors need proper verification. Every blank must be filled accurately. Every signature must be authentic. Every detail must be verified before we can proceed with arrangements. For 10 years, these forms followed predictable patterns. Family members would sit across from my desk, struggling through questions about their deceased loved one while I guided them gently through necessary information. Handwriting would be hesitant. Names would be misspelled. Dates would require verification. Normal human responses to abnormal circumstances. But in January of 2024, I started finding completed forms that no living person had filled out. The first incident involved Margaret Sullivan, an 84-year-old woman who'd passed at home from natural causes. Her daughter Patricia came in Tuesday morning to discuss arrangements, bringing Mrs. Sullivan's personal papers and identification. We scheduled our consultation for Thursday afternoon, allowing Patricia time to contact relatives and make initial decisions about burial preferences. But when I arrived Wednesday morning, Mrs. Sullivan's intake form was completed and sitting on my desk. Not partially completed, entirely finished, in careful cursive handwriting that matched the signature on Mrs. Sullivan's driver's license. Every field filled out correctly: full legal name, maiden name, birth date, social security number, parents' names, spouse information, children's details. Information that Patricia hadn't provided yet. Information I hadn't requested, written in handwriting that belonged to the woman lying in our preparation room. I assumed Patricia had come in early and completed the form, though I couldn't explain how she'd accessed my locked office. When she arrived Thursday afternoon, I thanked her for saving time by filling out the paperwork in advance. "I didn't fill out any paperwork," she said, examining the form. "But this is definitely my mother's handwriting. She always wrote in that distinctive cursive style, with the elaborate loops on her capital letters." Patricia studied the completed form carefully, checking each detail against her mother's personal documents. Everything was accurate: birth date, social security number, her father's full name, including his middle initial, which Patricia admitted she'd forgotten. Even the section requesting specific burial clothes contained precise instructions: navy blue dress with pearl buttons, the one I wore to Patricia's wedding. Pearl earrings from my jewelry box, not the diamond ones. "She's describing exactly what I was planning to choose," Patricia said quietly. "How could she have known?" I couldn't explain it, so I filed the form and proceeded with arrangements as if Patricia had completed it herself. Mrs. Sullivan's burial went smoothly, every detail matching the mysterious paperwork. But I kept copies of the form, studying the handwriting and comparing it to samples of Mrs. Sullivan's signature from various documents. The match was undeniable. Over the following months, similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. Robert Martinez's intake form appeared completed on my desk before his family's first visit, written in the block lettering his son recognized from years of birthday cards. Eleanor Kim's paperwork materialized overnight, filled out in the precise handwriting his wife had seen on grocery lists for 40 years. Dorothy Walsh's form contained information about her deceased siblings that her surviving children had never heard before. Each time, families confirmed the accuracy of details they'd never discussed, handwriting they immediately recognized, and preferences that matched exactly what they'd been considering. The forms appeared when my office was locked, when the building was empty, when no living person had access to the documents. But the information was always correct, always written in the deceased person's distinctive style. I started leaving blank intake forms on my desk intentionally, curious to see which cases would result in overnight completion. The pattern became clear: only certain deceased individuals filled out their own paperwork. Not everyone, not randomly, but specific people who seemed to have unfinished business requiring documentation. The most disturbing case involved Harold Thompson in June. His form appeared completed as usual, but it contained information that contradicted what his family had told me. Under military service, someone had written U.S. Navy, 1942 to 1946 Pacific Theater, Purple Heart recipient. But Harold's son insisted his father had never served in the military, had spent the war years working in a defense plant. When I showed the family the completed form, Harold's son went silent. He called his elderly aunt, who confirmed that Harold had indeed served in the Navy during World War II, but had never talked about his service after returning home. The Purple Heart was stored in a box in Harold's basement, along with citations his family had never seen. "He never told us," his son said, staring at the form. 50 years I knew my father, and he never mentioned being wounded in combat. How did this form know something he kept secret his entire life?" The forms began including increasingly personal details that living family members couldn't verify. Marriage dates for grandparents who'd died decades earlier. Names of stillborn children who'd never been discussed. Instructions for locating important documents hidden in houses that family members were still sorting through. Information that only the deceased person could have known, written in handwriting that belonged to someone who should no longer be capable of holding a pen. I stopped questioning the phenomenon and started treating the completed forms as legitimate documentation. When families arrived for consultations, I would present the paperwork as if they'd completed it in advance, allowing them to discover the handwriting and information themselves. The recognition was always immediate, always emotional, always comforting in ways that surprised me. The most profound case occurred in August with Elizabeth Reeves, a 91-year-old woman who'd been estranged from her family for over 20 years. Her form appeared completed with a detailed family reconciliation letter written on the back pages, expressing forgiveness for old arguments and love for grandchildren she'd never met. The handwriting matched samples from letters she'd written decades earlier. When her daughter read the letter during our consultation, she broke down completely. "This sounds exactly like something my mother would say," she sobbed. She was too proud to apologize when she was alive, but this is how she would have wanted to make things right. Elizabeth's funeral brought together family members who hadn't spoken in years, all united by the message written in their mother's distinctive handwriting. The service became a celebration of reconciliation rather than a ceremony of loss. and the family credited the mysterious letter with healing wounds that had festered for decades. I still find completed intake forms on my desk, still compare handwriting to driver's licenses and personal documents, still watch families discover messages written by hands that should no longer hold pens. The phenomenon has become part of my professional routine, as normal as scheduling services or coordinating with cemeteries. Some paperwork, I've learned, gets filled out by people who understand that love doesn't end with breathing, and that final wishes sometimes require one last signature. The forms continue appearing because some conversations with family members can only happen after the conversation partner has moved beyond the ability to speak aloud. In this business, you learn that death doesn't end communication, it just changes the medium. And sometimes the most important paperwork gets completed by the person it concerns most, using handwriting that families recognize even when logic insists it shouldn't exist. Computer systems don't make mistakes about who's alive and who isn't until they start planning for deaths that haven't happened yet. I'm Patricia Williams, and I've supervised crematory operations at Valley Memorial Services in Sacramento, California, for 13 years. The scheduling software manages every aspect of our operation: cremation appointments, chamber assignments, family notifications, completion timelines. The system runs precisely because families depend on reliable service during their most difficult moments. But the calendar started adding appointments for people who were still breathing, scheduling their deaths with accuracy that made me question whether some computers know more about mortality than the living do. Valley Memorial operates 3 crematory chambers in a modern facility designed for efficiency and dignity. My office overlooks the preparation area through one-way glass, allowing me to monitor operations while maintaining administrative oversight. The scheduling system displays on dual monitors current day operations on the left screen, upcoming appointments extending weeks into the future on the right. During busy periods, we might process 8 to 12 cremations daily, each one precisely timed to ensure families receive their loved ones' remains promptly. The software itself is straightforward: a calendar interface where I input client information, assign chamber numbers, block processing time, and coordinate with funeral homes for pickup and delivery. Each entry requires verification from death certificates, family authorization, and facility intake procedures. The system won't accept appointments without proper documentation, won't allow double booking of chambers, and won't process unauthorized changes. 15 years of development have made it foolproof, reliable, and absolutely dependent on accurate information input. Every Monday morning, I review the upcoming schedule, confirming appointments, checking chamber availability, ensuring adequate staffing for projected volume. The routine is methodical and predictable. Existing appointments remain stable. New bookings appear only after I input them manually, and the calendar reflects exactly what I've scheduled. No automatic entries, no system-generated appointments, no unexpected changes to established routines. But in March of 2024, the calendar started scheduling people who weren't dead. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday morning when I opened the scheduling system to find a new appointment for Thursday at 2 p.m. Robert Chen, Chamber 2, family notification pending. I had no record of inputting this appointment, no death certificate for Robert Chen, no authorization from any funeral home. I assumed a data entry error from the previous day and deleted the appointment immediately. By Thursday morning, the appointment had returned. Same name, same time, same chamber assignment. I deleted it again and called our software support company to report a possible database corruption issue. The technician ran diagnostics remotely and found no system errors, no unauthorized access, no explanation for automatic appointment generation. Thursday afternoon at 2:15 p.m., Hillcrest Funeral Home called to schedule a cremation for Robert Chen, who'd passed unexpectedly that morning from a heart attack. They requested Thursday evening processing if possible, but I explained our earliest availability was Friday. The funeral director seemed surprised, mentioning that their computer system had showed Thursday at 2 p.m. as already reserved for Mr. Chen. I checked our scheduling system immediately. The Robert Chen appointment was there, exactly as it had appeared originally, but now showing confirmed status with proper documentation attached. Death certificate, family authorization, intake paperwork, all dated Thursday, all properly executed, as if I'd scheduled the appointment normally after receiving official notification. I convinced myself it was coincidence, that the software had somehow predicted a scheduling conflict and preemptively blocked the time. But 3 days later, another impossible appointment appeared. Margaret Foster, Monday 9 a.m., Chamber 1. No death certificate, no family contact, no record of Margaret Foster in our system. I deleted the appointment and documented the incident for our software vendor. Monday morning, Margaret Foster died in a car accident at 8:45 a.m. Eternal Rest Funeral Home called at 10:30 requesting cremation services for a client who'd specified our facility in her prearranged funeral plan. They asked about Monday availability, mentioning their computer showed 9 a.m. reserved under Margaret Foster's name. The appointment was there when I checked, complete with all required documentation dated Monday morning. Margaret Foster's prearrangement contract, signed 3 years earlier, specified cremation at Valley Memorial, with Monday morning preference if possible. Everything appeared normal except that the appointment had existed in our system 3 days before she died. Over the following weeks, the pattern became undeniable. Names would appear on the schedule weeks in advance, always people who were alive when the appointments first materialized, always people who would die exactly when the calendar predicted. I started documenting each anomaly screenshot, the impossible appointment, note the death date, confirm the subsequent funeral home contact, verify the timing accuracy. The software was scheduling deaths with perfect precision. Dorothy Martinez, April 3rd at 11:15 a.m., died April 3rd at 11:07 a.m. from complications during routine surgery. James Wilson, April 9th at 3:30 p.m. Fatal traffic accident, April 9th at 3:28 p.m. Linda Park, April 15th at 7:45 a.m. Passed peacefully in her sleep, April 15th at 7:36 a.m. Every prediction proved accurate within minutes of the scheduled time. I stopped deleting the impossible appointments and started preparing chambers in advance, ensuring adequate staffing, coordinating with funeral homes who somehow had the same mysterious scheduling information. The system was functioning perfectly, was just operating with knowledge that shouldn't exist. I reported the phenomenon to my supervisor, Dr. Martinez, describing the pattern as diplomatically as possible. He reviewed my documentation, checked the software logs, even contacted the vendor for technical analysis. Everything appeared normal except for the impossible accuracy of advanced scheduling. "Patricia, I understand your concern," he said during our meeting. "But if the system is helping us provide better service to families, perhaps we shouldn't question the mechanism too closely. Grief doesn't wait for convenient scheduling." But I couldn't ignore the implications. The computer was predicting deaths, not just scheduling cremations. Each appointment represented someone's final moments, calculated and displayed weeks before their actual passing. I was maintaining a calendar of future mortality, watching names appear, and knowing exactly when those people would stop breathing. The most disturbing case appeared in early May. Patricia Williams, May 22nd at 4:30 p.m., Chamber 3, my own name, scheduled for cremation at the end of the month. I deleted the appointment immediately, cleared the cache, restarted the system. The entry returned within an hour, showing the same date, same time, same chamber assignment. I took vacation time that week, driving to San Francisco to stay with my sister, avoiding the crematory entirely on May 22nd. My phone rang at 4:25 p.m., Dr. Martinez calling to ask about Chamber 3 scheduling for the following day. He mentioned that our system showed Patricia Williams reserved for 4:30 p.m., but he couldn't find corresponding paperwork. "There's been a mistake," I told him. "I didn't schedule anything under my name. The appointment's been here for weeks," he said. "Same as all the others. Is there something I should know about your health, Patricia?" I returned to work Monday morning to find my appointment had been automatically rescheduled for May 29th at 4:30 p.m. Every time I deleted it, the system restored the entry within hours. The computer insisted on scheduling my cremation, adjusting the date each time I avoided the appointed time. I finally understood that the calendar wasn't predicting deaths, it was scheduling them. The system had become something more than software, something that coordinated mortality with the same precision it applied to chamber assignments and family notifications. Each appointment was an engagement with death itself, confirmed and processed like any other business transaction. I stopped trying to delete my appointment. Instead, I've learned to reschedule it, pushing the date forward whenever it approaches, maintaining a running negotiation with software that seems to understand mortality better than I understand life. The system accepts my revisions patiently, updating my cremation appointment with the same reliability it schedules everyone else's. The calendar still displays impossible appointments weeks in advance, still predicts deaths with perfect accuracy, still coordinates the precise timing of final moments. I've learned to work with the schedule rather than against it, preparing chambers for people who are still alive, ensuring everything is ready when families need our services. Some systems, I've discovered, operate on schedules that extend beyond normal business planning, and some appointments, once made, require careful management rather than cancellation. The computer continues maintaining its calendar of mortality, and I continue rescheduling my own final appointment, hoping the system remains patient with employees who prefer to postpone their scheduled service indefinitely. Some deliveries arrive before anyone places the order. I'm Miguel Santos, and I've managed the warehouse operations at Eternal Rest Casket Company in Fresno, California, for 9 years. Our facility supplies funeral homes throughout the Central Valley with caskets, urns, and burial accessories. Every item that enters our warehouse is ordered, documented, and tracked through a computerized inventory system that accounts for every delivery and shipment. But caskets started appearing in our facility that no one had ordered, addressed to people who were still alive, crafted in styles that didn't exist in any manufacturer's catalog. Eternal Rest operates from a 40,000 square foot warehouse on the industrial side of Fresno, with loading docks, climate-controlled storage areas, and office space for administrative operations. My responsibilities include receiving deliveries, managing inventory levels, coordinating shipments to funeral homes, and maintaining accurate records of every casket and accessory that passes through our facility. The work requires precision because funeral directors depend on timely delivery of specific products for services that can't be postponed. Our inventory system tracks approximately 800 different casket models from 12 manufacturers nationwide. Each casket has a unique product code, detailed specifications, pricing information, and delivery timelines. Orders arrive through our computer system from funeral homes, are processed through purchasing, scheduled for delivery, and tracked until shipment to the final destination. Every item in our warehouse corresponds to a documented purchase order and customer request. The caskets we stock follow standard industry designs: mahogany, oak, and steel models in traditional configurations with appropriate hardware and interior fabrics. Nothing exotic, nothing custom, nothing that couldn't be ordered from established manufacturers through normal business channels. Funeral families expect classic, dignified designs that honor their loved ones without drawing attention to the casket itself. Our inventory reflects those conservative preferences. But in February of 2024, caskets began appearing in our warehouse that didn't match any products in our system. The first anomaly arrived on a Tuesday morning when I opened the receiving dock to find a casket positioned near our loading area. Ornate mahogany construction with hand-carved details I'd never seen before, intricate scrollwork, inlaid precious metals, engravings in a script that looked vaguely Eastern European but wasn't anything I could identify. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond anything our regular manufacturers produced. No delivery receipt, no shipping documentation, no record of the item in our computer system. I checked with our receiving staff, but no one remembered processing the delivery. The truck drivers who serviced our facility had no knowledge of bringing anything unusual. I examined the casket carefully, looking for manufacturer labels, model numbers, or shipping tags that might explain its origin. The only identification was a small brass nameplate attached to the interior lid. Maria Gonzalez, rest in eternal peace. The engraving looked professionally done, permanent, as if the casket had been specifically manufactured for Maria Gonzalez. But we had no Maria Gonzalez in our customer database, no pending orders for anyone by that name, no funeral homes requesting custom caskets with personal engravings. I called our purchasing department to report the mystery delivery, assuming some kind of shipping error had sent someone else's custom order to our facility. But a search of our vendor systems revealed no caskets ordered for Maria Gonzalez, no custom engravings in production, no explanation for how the item had arrived at our warehouse. 3 days later, Peaceful Meadows Funeral Home called, requesting rush delivery of a casket for Maria Gonzalez, who'd passed unexpectedly from a stroke. They needed a mahogany casket with traditional styling, preferably something with elegant details that would honor an elderly woman who'd been active in her church community. The ornate casket in our warehouse was a perfect match. When Peaceful Meadows picked up the casket, their funeral director commented on the exceptional craftsmanship and asked about ordering similar pieces for future services. I couldn't explain where it had come from or how to order another one, so I deflected by saying it was a special one-time acquisition from an estate sale. But Maria Gonzalez's casket was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, more mystery caskets appeared in our warehouse, always during off hours, always without documentation, always bearing nameplate engravings for people who hadn't died yet. Robert Chen's casket arrived 4 days before his fatal heart attack. Dorothy Martinez's ornate steel model appeared a week before her car accident. Each casket featured craftsmanship that exceeded anything available through normal channels. With engravings in languages I couldn't identify and decorative elements that seemed to tell stories about the deceased person's life. I started arriving early and leaving late, trying to catch the mysterious deliveries in progress. Security cameras showed our loading dock area clearly, but reviewing footage revealed nothing unusual. The caskets simply appeared between recording intervals, as if they materialized during the brief gaps when cameras switched positions or refreshed their recording cycles. The delivery drivers who serviced our facility had no memory of bringing the mystery caskets. I showed them photos, described the ornate designs, asked about unusual pickup locations or shipping instructions. None of them remembered handling anything that matched the descriptions. It was as if the caskets arrived through some delivery system that operated outside normal transportation networks. More disturbing was the accuracy of the personal engravings. Each nameplate didn't just include the deceased person's name, it contained details about their lives, their families, their achievements, written in scripts that seemed to reflect their cultural heritage or personal history. Robert Chen's casket bore Chinese characters that his family later translated as poetry about family devotion. Dorothy Martinez's engravings included Spanish phrases about motherhood and faith that perfectly captured her personality. The caskets were being custom manufactured for people who were still alive, with personal details that could only be known by those closest to them. But the orders weren't coming through any system I could trace, and the manufacturers weren't anyone I could contact or identify. I began documenting each mystery arrival, carefully photographs, measurements, detailed descriptions of the engravings, and decorative elements. The caskets represented extraordinary craftsmanship, often featuring inlay work, precious metal accents, and carving techniques that suggested master-level artisans. The level of customization exceeded anything available through commercial funeral supply channels. The pattern became predictable. Mystery casket arrives. Documentation shows no corresponding order. Person named on the engraving dies within days. Funeral home calls requesting casket for that exact person. Perfect match for the family's needs and budget. The system worked flawlessly, providing exactly what families needed before they knew they would need it. The most unsettling delivery occurred in early April. Small white casket with engravings in what looked like children's drawings. Simple flowers, stick figures, words in crayon-like script, that spelled Emma Rodriguez, age 7, beloved daughter and sister. I'd never seen a child's casket with decorations that looked like they'd been designed by other children, as if Emma's classmates had somehow contributed to the design. Emma Rodriguez died in a playground accident 5 days later. When her family came to select a casket, her older brother saw the white casket through our showroom window and insisted it was perfect for his sister. He said the decorations looked exactly like drawings Emma had made for their refrigerator, and the engravings matched her favorite bedtime stories. The caskets continued arriving through spring and summer, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship that perfectly matched the deceased person's personality, cultural background, and family preferences. I stopped questioning the system and started treating the mystery deliveries as a reliable source of inventory that somehow anticipated demand with perfect accuracy. But I never stopped wondering who was placing the orders, where the caskets were being manufactured, and how the artisans knew so much about people who were still alive when production began. The engravings suggested intimate knowledge of each person's life story, their relationships, their dreams, and fierce information that should only be known by family members and close friends. I still manage warehouse operations at Eternal Rest, still process normal orders through established channels, still maintain inventory records for documented purchases. But I've learned to expect the mystery deliveries, to set aside space for caskets that arrive without paperwork, to trust that someone, somewhere, is ensuring that every family receives exactly what they need to honor their loved ones. The caskets continue appearing during off hours, crafted with impossible beauty and personalized with details that no manufacturer should know. I've accepted that some orders are placed by forces that operate outside normal business channels, ensuring that death, when it comes, is met with dignity that someone arranged in advance. Stone paths shouldn't change direction on their own, especially when they lead to graves that don't officially exist. I'm Janet Murphy, and I've been head groundskeeper at Willowbrook Cemetery in Eugene, Oregon for 16 years. The work involves maintaining 47 acres of burial grounds, memorial gardens, and landscaped areas that provide peaceful settings for families to visit their deceased loved ones. Every path, every planted bed, every stone marker requires careful attention to preserve the dignity and beauty that grief deserves. But the memorial garden taught me that some paths choose their own destinations, leading to places that shouldn't exist and carrying messages meant for people who haven't yet joined the residents beneath the earth. Willowbrook Cemetery was established in 1889, with sections that reflect different eras of burial practices and landscape design. The memorial garden occupies 3 acres near the center of the grounds, designed in 1995 as a contemplative space where families can scatter ashes, plant remembrance flowers, or simply sit quietly among the living reminders of those they've lost. Curved pathways connect seating areas, water features, and planted beds arranged to provide privacy and natural beauty throughout the seasons. The stepping stone paths in the memorial garden follow a predetermined design installed during the original construction. Each stone was positioned according to landscape architectural plans, creating gentle curves that guide visitors through the space while respecting the solemn purpose of the area. The stones themselves are local river rock, naturally shaped and sized to provide stable footing across soft ground and planted areas. 28 years of foot traffic had worn the paths into familiar routes that visitors could navigate comfortably. My daily routine includes checking the memorial garden for maintenance needs, trimming overgrown plants, clearing debris from pathways, ensuring the stepping stones remain level and secure. The work is methodical and peaceful, performed in early morning hours before families begin arriving for visits. During spring and summer, I spend considerable time in the garden, as the planted areas require regular attention to maintain their intended appearance. But in September of 2024, I arrived one morning to find that the stepping stones had rearranged themselves overnight. Not dramatically, the changes were subtle enough that I initially assumed I was misremembering the usual path configuration. Several stones near the east entrance seemed to have shifted position, creating a route that curved more sharply toward a section of the garden that had never been heavily trafficked. The stones appeared naturally placed, as if they'd always formed that particular path, but I'd walked these routes daily for years and knew they were different. I checked the maintenance logs and landscape plans, confirming the original stone placement. The shifted stones had definitely moved from their documented positions, creating a new path that led toward an area we'd always kept as open lawn space. I assumed soil settling or frost heave had displaced the stones, though the movement seemed unusually coordinated for natural geological processes. Over the following days, more stones appeared to have repositioned themselves, not all at once, but gradually, as if someone was carefully adjusting the path configuration stone by stone. The new route became more defined each morning, leading visitors away from the established memorial areas toward the far corner of the garden where we'd never installed any formal features. I started documenting the changes with photographs, taking pictures of the stone positions each morning, and comparing them to previous days. The evidence was undeniable. Stones were moving overnight, creating a path that hadn't existed before, leading to a destination that wasn't part of our memorial garden design. Following the new path to its terminus, I discovered something that shouldn't have been there: a series of unmarked burial sites, arranged in a rough circle around a central depression in the earth. No headstones, no memorial markers, no records in our cemetery database. Just subtle mounds in the grass that suggested bodies buried beneath the surface, positioned as if they were facing inward toward the center depression. I checked our burial records extensively, searching for any documentation of interments in that section of the memorial garden. Nothing. The area had been designated as open space since the garden's construction, with no authorized burials, no purchased plots, no indication that anyone had ever been laid to rest in that location. But the ground showed clear evidence of human burial: the slightly raised mounds, the different grass growth patterns, the settled earth that indicated organic matter decomposing below the surface. Someone had been burying bodies in our cemetery without authorization, without records, without the knowledge of cemetery administration. I reported the discovery to our cemetery director, Mr. Harrison, who immediately contacted local authorities. The police investigation revealed that the burial sites were decades old, possibly dating to the early years of the cemetery's operation. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed human remains in the unmarked graves, but the burials appeared to predate modern record-keeping requirements. The strangest aspect of the investigation was what happened when the wind blew across the unmarked graves. Not every time, not predictably, but on certain evenings when the air moved just right, the burial sites seemed to whisper names. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in voices so soft they could be mistaken for wind through grass or leaves rustling overhead. But the names were clear enough to recognize: Robert Chen, Margaret Foster, Linda Park, David Torres. Names of people who were alive, people I knew from the community, people who had no connection to Willowbrook Cemetery, except for the whispered voices that seemed to emerge from unmarked graves when wind passed through the memorial garden. I started avoiding the area during evening hours, arriving early in the morning when the wind was typically calm and the whispered names weren't audible. But the stepping stone paths continued rearranging themselves, creating new routes that led to different sections of the cemetery, always terminating at areas where I would subsequently discover unmarked burial sites. The paths began appearing throughout Willowbrook, not just in the memorial garden. Stones from formal walkways would migrate overnight, creating trails that led to forgotten corners of the grounds where ground-penetrating radar revealed more unauthorized burials. Each discovery brought the same pattern: unmarked graves arranged in circles, wind-carried whispers of names belonging to living people, burial sites with no documentation in our official records. I stopped following the new paths and started replacing the moved stones to their original positions each morning. But the stone rearrangement continued, becoming more persistent and obvious. Entire sections of pathway would reconfigure overnight, creating routes so defined that families began following them automatically, assuming they were official cemetery trails. The whispered names became more frequent and clear. especially during autumn evenings when the wind carried voices across the cemetery grounds. Always names of living people, always spoken in tones so soft they seemed to emerge from the earth itself, rather than from any human source. I learned to avoid the cemetery during windstorms, when the chorus of whispered names became overwhelming. Mrs. Chen called our office in late October, asking if we provided any special memorial services. She'd visited the cemetery to research burial options for her elderly mother, and had heard someone calling her husband Robert's name repeatedly during her walk through the memorial garden. She wanted to know if we offered personalized audio recordings as part of our memorial services. I assured her we provided no such services, that she must have misheard wind or maintenance equipment, but I knew exactly what she'd experienced. Her husband Robert's name had been among the first whispered by the unmarked graves, spoken in voices that seemed to know things about the living that the dead shouldn't know. The stone paths continue appearing throughout Willowbrook Cemetery, creating routes that lead to burial sites that exist outside our official records. I've learned to work around them rather than fight them, maintaining the documented areas while leaving the mysterious pathways undisturbed. Families seem to appreciate the additional walking routes, and the whispered names have become part of the cemetery's natural soundscape. Some paths, I've discovered, choose their own destinations regardless of landscape architectural plans. And some names get spoken by voices that understand mortality better than the living understand life. The memorial garden continues evolving according to its own design, creating connections between the documented dead and the people who haven't yet joined them in the earth beneath the carefully maintained grass.